Today's story is not one of my own, but it's one of those side projects that I'm completely interested in. I really hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to Gam Catches Up. I've said it before in my other videos. I was working on side projects, and this is one of them. Before we get into today's story, please do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with a friend of yours that might find it interesting, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so it'll alert you every time I make a new video and upload. Alright, let's get into this. Firstly, what is a cryptid? A cryptid is any creature that may or may not exist. Cryptids are reported, but the reality of them hasn't been completely proven just yet. Famous ones are like the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, that sort of thing. Now, those are famous cryptids, but there are a lot of lesser-known cryptids that are just as creepy and as freaky. Take, for example, today's story. The story of the Flatwoods Monster, also known as the Braxton County Monster. On the night of September 12, 1952, the east coast of the United States, there were a ton of reports of UFO sightings. Now, maybe they were just meteorites or weather balloons or some such thing, but there were a ton of witnesses calling in to report what looked like fireballs flying through the sky, almost like planes that were on fire and crashing into the earth. The reports came in all across different states like Virginia, Ohio, Tennessee, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And it was in a small town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, with a population of all 300 people at the time, that our story takes place. Normally during the fall, it would have been cold out, but they were having an Indian summer that year. And so this group of 10 boys were all out and they were playing. They ranged in age between 10 and 14 years old. When out of nowhere, they see this bright reddish sphere of light come flying overhead. And it flies past them. It flies over this hill that's a little bit off in the distance. And then it flies over another hill, hovers for a minute, and then seems to just slowly land. And they can tell, because they know the area, it lands right at the woods right behind Bailey Fisher's farm. So now they get super excited, a couple of the boys do, and the other half of them get kind of scared. They head home. The other boys, being super excited and curious, go running off towards the light, and on the way, two of the boys that are brothers, Edison and Freddie May, they pass their house. They stop in, they run in, they have to tell their mother what's going on. Mom, we just saw this ball of light. It's a UFO. It just landed at Bailey Fisher's farm. And the boy's mother, Kathleen May, hearing this, is taken aback and a little caught off guard. What are you kids talking about, a UFO and everything else? Well, we're going to go find it. Well, no, I'm going with you if you're going out there. And we're grabbing our friend, Eugene Lemon. Eugene Lemon was an 18-year-old boy that lived nearby. He was a National Guardsman, and they stop and they get him. They tell him what's going on. He grabs a flashlight and his hunting dog, and the whole group sets off to Bailey Fisher's farm to go into the woods and go look for this weird thing that has landed back there. So now they travel over the one hill. They travel over the other hill. They're now at Bailey Fisher's farm, and they're approaching the edge of the woods, and the dog takes off ahead of them, barking and snarling and flipping out. Then all of a sudden, they hear the dog yelp, and it comes flying out of the woods with its tail tucked between its legs. It kept running all the way back to town, where townsfolk there who saw the dog, where it was found later, had said it walked up to a porch, climbed up on the porch, threw up, laid down, and not long after, it died. The group wasn't deterred by this, however, and as they started to enter the woods was on a hillside they started to walk up this hill, and as they did, they noticed there was this foul-smelling mist that was just covering the ground, right near their knee level, and caused their eyes to water. The two people leading the group, Eugene Lemon and Neil Nunley, they got to the top first, and they look down, and they see this big ball of fire 50 feet to the right of them. And somebody else that was in the group reported it was the size of a house. The object looked like it was crashed into the ground and sticking out, and it appeared to be pulsing light. So it wasn't just solid and on, it was actually kind of flickering. And it put out this like purplish hue. They heard this strange whining and a hissing sound that filled the air. And they see from the object, it looks like more of that mist is leaking out. And now it's not just bothering their eyes, it's also burning their noses and their throats. And they're breathing it in, and it's really starting to irritate them. So now this small group is standing there, and they're just staring at this object on the hillside, and there's an oak tree next to them. And they thought they saw an animal in the tree because it looked like it was perched on a branch. So Lemon turns around, and he shines his flashlight at it, and that's when they all get a terrible shock. Instead of an animal, they see this thing that's about 10 feet with glowing eyes standing next to the tree. And as soon as the flashlight hit it, the eyes shoot out these bright beams of light, and it illuminates all of the fog around them. The creature reflecting in the flashlight seems to be more machine than animal, and it could be just that it was wearing a suit, or maybe it's a metal casing. But it was dark in color, and it seemed to be green to some of the people that saw it. But it may be that the metal was actually reflecting the foliage in the hill around it, so it just made it look green. But it had a glow to it, and the middle torso was kind of cylindrical, and the lower torso fanned out, almost like the way a kitchen apron would. They couldn't discern any arms. It just looked like two short antenna-looking things sticking straight out. Its head was round, but it was surrounded by something maybe like a helmet that was shaped like the ace of spades. And the eyes, they were perfectly round and just glowing. It had no feet, and it levitated about a foot off the ground and was gliding around. Everyone, for the most part, just froze into place, and the creature starts just hovering over to Kathleen May, and it gets close to her, and she can feel the warmth from it. It's gotten so close to her. And out of nowhere, it just starts squirting like this oily substance right all over the front of her, all over her clothes. The creature then turns and starts to float away, and it's leaving a trail of this oil stuff behind it as it goes. It's at that point everybody in the group freaks out and realizes what they've just seen. Some say that Eugene Lemon actually passed out and two of the kids had to drag him behind them. But collectively, they all ran straight out of those woods, right over the hill and right into town, raising the alarm and telling everybody what they had just witnessed. The group then headed back to the May house. The mom and her two boys, joined by Eugene Lemon, are all sitting there, and they're having trouble breathing, and the boys were bruised and bleeding, but they figured that was from them running through the woods to get out of there when that thing seemed to attack their mother. Apparently, Eugene Lemon vomited all night long. Kathleen's eyes were red and leaking tears. Edison and Freddie, they needed medical attention because their mouths were so damaged and their throats were so damaged from the mist. So now all this had happened right around 7:40. It's now 8:15 at night. Kathleen gets on the phone, she calls the sheriff, and she tells him what happened. And the sheriff turns around, he calls the state police. When he calls the state police, one of the troopers, his name is A. Lee Stewart Jr., he actually was co-owner and publisher and a photojournalist for the Braxton Democrat, which was the local newspaper. He jumped at that opportunity to join the investigation. He went right to the May house. He gathered a group of armed men, but the monster was gone. They couldn't find it. they could still smell the odor from the fog. It was still on the hill. And one of the sheriffs, he had taken 2 dogs with him. The dogs ran off howling into the fog. And so they all just said, you know what, I'm done with this. They gave up until morning. The sheriff noticed he had some of the oil actually on his clothing as well from where he had kneeled down to see what the fog was. Now, what's interesting is the military got involved rather fast. The West Virginia National Guard was mobilized by the U.S. Air Force and sent out to Flatwoods and also to a town that was about 19 miles away named Frametown, where there was a report another fireball in the sky had been seen coming down. So at about 1:30 in the morning in Flatwoods, about 30 National Guardsmen showed up at the site where this ball was seen, and they didn't find anything. Some of the troops actually stayed out there all night looking around for it, and they searched the entire area again in the morning. Also in the morning, Stewart, the reporter and state patrolman, he returned and he looked around, and all he found was some skid marks that were about 30 feet long that were left in the grass right around where the orb had sat. While he was studying the skid marks, he kneeled down, and when he stood back up, he realized he had that oily stuff on his pants. Stewart did find, though, near the skid marks, this odd piece of silvery metal that kind of looked like solder droplets. Stewart then went, and because he owned the local paper, was a co-owner of the local paper, went and was the first person to actually break the story to the press. As soon as that story got out, tons of people showed up looking for any kind of piece of evidence, any kind of souvenir they could find, and they weren't completely disappointed. They found some black plastic-like material, they found little bits of that same kind of silvery metal, and they found more of that oil substance, little traces of it. And even though all the troops and Stewart and all these people that had come out looking for the monster never found it, doesn't mean there weren't other sightings of it. At around 8 p.m. on September 13th, the next night, George and Edith Snitowski were coming back from visiting a relative in Cincinnati, Ohio, and were taking some back roads. They were headed back to their home in Queens, New York. And they were right near Frametown, which, as I said before, isn't that far away from Flatwoods and is where one of the balls of light were seen. And without warning, their car just up and dies, stalls out right in the middle of the road. George is cranking on it. He's trying, and the car will not restart. So George stranded there on this back road with his wife, and they also had their baby with them. Their little infant was in the back seat. He gets out and he pops the hood. He takes a look, see if he can figure out what's going on. Can't really figure it out. Closes the hood, and he notices this weird smell. George would later say that the smell was the sickening smell of a combination of ether and a burnt sulfur. He naturally just figured something in the car must have burned up. The smell actually bothered the baby bad enough where it started crying, and George was now stuck with the decision to make. It's the middle of the night. It's completely dark out here. He's stuck on this back road. He's got his wife and his little infant child in the car. He knows Frametown is 12 miles up the road, and he can probably walk there, but he doesn't really want to leave his family in the car, out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. Then, all of a sudden, a blinding violet light shot out of the woods, and George opened a window, and because the window was fogged over, George couldn't see out of it. All he can see is this light coming out of the woods. He rolls it down so he can see a little better, and the entirety of the interior of the car gets filled with this nauseating mist. And despite it smelling so bad, he gets out of the car because he wants to see what is this light. He starts throwing up violently as soon as he gets out of the car, and he sees about 200 to 300 yards away this giant sphere of light. He said it looked like a giant frosted street lamp floating in the air, moving back and forth, just hovering there. Now, either mesmerized or just out of curiosity, George starts walking closer towards it, even though he's not feeling well. After just getting done throwing up his lungs, He begins to feel hot, and then he feels like he's getting this low-level electrical shock going through his body. That electrical shock feeling freaks him out so much, he turns around and tries to mad dash back to his car, but his legs, they start giving out under him while he's trying to run back, and he fell down a couple of times. Then he hears Edith scream, and it's this high-pitched, oh my God scream. And it's about this point where, from the orb's illumination, he can actually see what his wife is screaming about, and he's almost back to the car. He sees this thing. It's standing about 8 to 9 feet tall, and it's shaped like a man, but its head looks completely reptilian. And this thing has a bloated body and a lower torso that seems like it's made of some sort of solid mass. Seeing this, George jumps into the car, slams the door shut, grabs his wife, grabs the baby from the back seat, and pushes them both down onto the floor. Then he opens up his glove box, and inside, luckily, he keeps a knife. He grabs the knife and gets ready to defend them. The creature, which was standing about 6 feet away from the car, has now moved closer, but it kind of looks like it's gliding towards the car. And it glides till it's directly in front of the car. And it reaches out one of its spindly little arms, and it looked like it had a clawed hand. The creature then took its fingers and ran it across the windshield and the hood, almost like it was checking the car out, like it was examining it, and the globe drifted over to the woods where the creature had apparently come from. The creature then turned and glided back into the woods, and within a few minutes, they saw the globe of light just slowly go up into the air, rise above the trees, move into the sky, and then just boom, take off and shoot away, and it left behind a trail of bright light. Seeing the ball of light take off into the sky, George sits up and just desperately tries and turn the key in the ignition, and the car started without a problem. They drove to the nearest place they could find, which was this truck stop, and the two of them, both shaken up really bad, had a whole conversation, tried to calm themselves down before they went inside. And they both decided, we're not going to tell anybody about what we just saw. So they get a hotel room for the night. And the next morning when George goes out, he looks where the creature had touched the car, and he sees discoloration in the paint from where the creature drug its lizard-like fingers. Even though the two of them agreed never to tell the story, in 1955, George went and told his account in Mail magazine. There was also another reported sighting of a strange creature that had come in on the same night of the Fisher Farm incident, but before the sighting at the Fisher Farm. Miss Audra Harper, who lived in Heaters, which is located about 5 miles north of Flatwoods, had to go to town for something. It was her and her friend, and they decided they'd just cut through the woods because it knocked off a significant amount of time in their trip to get from her house to town. About half a mile into the woods, they noticed up on one of the hills they saw this ball of fire, this bright glowing light, and they thought it was a neighbor having a bonfire or doing what they call fox chasing. At first they didn't really pay too much attention to it until they looked back and saw the fire had vanished, and they could just see a slight glow from it, and they saw this man-shaped figure. The figure looked distorted and scared both her and her friend, and they took off running in a dead sprint, and they escaped. They hid behind boulders and rocks, ducking and dodging as they went down the hill and ran straight to town and reported it. Now, hearing these stories, I know what you're going to say. Okay, Gam, where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Well, in the early 1990s, Kathleen May gave an interview, and she said there was 2 men that had come not long after the sighting, and they first said they were journalists, then they produced ID and said they were from the government in Washington. They didn't just visit her, they visited everyone who was there in Flatwoods that night, and they collected all the little bits of metal, all the little black plastic pieces, and all the clothing that had the oil substance on it. And as far as George Snitowski not telling his story right away, there was a pretty good reason for it. After the original story of the Flatwoods Monster had broken and Stewart had done the initial report to the press about everything, it actually hit nationwide. But the media screwed up the entire story and started exaggerating it. They said the creature had bulging eyes, clawed hands, and was green with a blood red face. It wore robes. It was half dragon, half man. They just completely blew it into this ridiculous thing that caused a bunch of mass hysteria. And they painted a picture during a television interview that they did of Kathleen May, her two sons, and Eugene Lemon as country bumpkins. Dumb country folk who let their imaginations run wild and scare the crap out of themselves. The bigger newspapers like the Charleston Daily Mail reported on September 15th that the creature was nothing more than a combination of their imaginations, an airplane warning beacon, and a flashing meteor reflecting on the trunk of a dead tree. And then on September 23rd, the Charleston Gazette ran an interview with a local insurance man and an amateur astronomer who insisted that the monster was an illusion created by gases from a meteor. Other skeptics came out and said that it was nothing more than a meteor falling from the sky and fog naturally occurring because of the Indian summer, and what they saw in the tree when they shined a flashlight on it was nothing more than an owl. The story, though, has become folklore in the local town and actually become part of their culture. It's such an interesting case that even in video games nowadays, like Fallout 76, there's actually a Flatwoods monster that you can hunt down. So what do you think? Was what Kathleen May, her kids, Eugene Lemon, these people that saw it, do you believe them? Do you believe the skeptics? I'll leave that up to you to decide. But I will throw in one other little interesting fact. Apparently where those skid marks were, in that area, all the foliage had died not long after, and it has yet to recover. Just some food for thought. So hopefully you enjoyed this story. Please do me a favor and in the comments, tell me what you think. Do you think they were telling the truth? Do you think the skeptics are right? Just let me know. I think it's an interesting thing. I actually believe their story. Thank you again for listening. Hopefully you did like this. If you did, please hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more of these along with my own original stories, but this is one of those side projects, as I said in the beginning of the video, that I've been working on. Also, hit the notification bell so it'll let you know whenever I upload a new video, which will probably be every Tuesday. And if you know somebody who would have enjoyed this type of story, please share the video with a friend. I'm Gam, and I'll see you next time.